The theme of this passage here begins with the folly of words and counsel. And I would point out to you just the verse before that, that it too was dealing with words. So in verse 11, the principle was be mindful of your tongue, choose your words carefully. So Ecclesiastes 10, verse 11, and we read, surely then the serpent, the snake, the viper, will bite without enchantment. The enchantment is the idea of a charmer like you sometimes see in the Middle East. And a babbler is no better. An owner or a master is no better. And so surely the serpent will bite without enchantment, without a whisper. And here's some verses that kind of go along and support that thought. The tongue of the wise uses knowledge right, but the mouth of fools poureth out foolishness. Another, whoso keepeth his mouth and his tongue keepeth his soul from troubles. In our class here, we should be old enough now, we've learned to think before you speak. Most of us probably could say when we were younger, we would speak before we would think. Hopefully with age has come wisdom. Another, James 3 and verse 5, even so the tongue is a little member, it boasteth great things. I think about politicians every time I read that verse. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. We could add to that today in our communication a little text, a little email, a little social media. Behold how much it can kindle. It can start a fire. And the tongue is a fire, world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members. It defileth the whole body, setteth on fire the course of nature, and is set on fire of hell. The tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. 1 Peter 3, verse 10, again about the tongue. He that will love life and see good days, let him what? Bite his tongue. Refrain his tongue from evil, and his lips that they speak no guile. That is, that your words are innocent. Now that brings us then to where I wanted to focus today, and that is on the folly of a fool's words and counsel. So you have your notes there. Let's go to verse 12, all right? So looking at verse 12, we read, the words, that is again the speech or the communication of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool will swallow up himself, or literally consume himself. So we have two people in verse 12. Who are the two people? The wise man and the foolish man. So we're dealing with two characters, all right? So let's take the wise man first. The characteristic of the wise man is what? His words are gracious. The word gracious there would be the word they are favored. They are pleasing words. So here's the thought that goes with that. A wise man is known for gracious words, while the lips of a fool consume him and those who heed his counsel. If you were at Dr. Eustace's funeral, I made the comment, but there were some others that made the comment as well, that if you were around Dr. Eustace, you would appreciate he was a man that spoke with words of grace, kind words, even though he was sometimes in a position of power and influence. But the overriding testimony that I knew of his life was that he was a gracious man. So let's look at what this says then about a wise man. And so the words of a wise man's mouth are gracious. Now another thing we could add to that, his words are pleasing, his words are kind, his words earn him favor. And so if there used to be a saying, and there probably still is, if you don't have anything good to say, what? Don't say anything at all, right? And there's a lot of wisdom that goes with that. So the words of a wise person are gracious. So you can listen to somebody's conversation, and as you do so, you're going to learn what manner of man they are. Look back. Let's look back. Turn the clock back many, many years. Let's go back to junior high school. All right? So I've just picked you up. I've transported you. You are now an 8th grader. All around you are 8th graders. Now, generally speaking, 8th graders are known for wisdom or foolishness. Huh? They're known for foolishness, right? They boast, they say things without thinking, they open their mouth, and out comes foolishness. And you know, I'm reminded in the culture we're living in today, I think in my era growing up, and probably in yours, there was at least a little bit of a governor on your lips. There was a little bit of a rein on your lips. But generally today, I don't know that it's like there is nothing that has a governor anymore. It's just blatant, it's crude, it's rude, the language that we're hearing in our culture. Would you agree? All right, now look at this then. Let's go to the next thought then. So we've dealt with the wise person. Here's a verse that goes with that. Ephesians 4:29, Paul writing to the church at Ephesus. And he writes, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of what? Edifying, that it may minister, what's the word? Grace unto the hearers. And so the words that we use should be words that encourage, they strengthen. Now, the scriptures do tell us that the work often is to reprove, rebuke, and exhort with all long-suffering. And so we understand there's a season and a time to rebuke, there's a season and a time to correct, but there is also a season for ministering grace. So minister grace unto the hearers. That is, encourage them. And I made a comment, I don't know if it was here or it's been a while since we've been together. How much does it cost to offer a word of encouragement to someone? How much does that cost? Nothing. But here's a question. Why are we so hesitant to encourage others? Would you agree that we are hesitant, that we tend to take for granted rather than encourage? Anybody? Thought? Why are we so hesitant to encourage? No one? You know, say that again? Don't want to offend. I think one reason that we're hesitant to encourage others is that we're self-centered. We tend to only think about ourselves. If we're honest, how will what I'm about to do, how will what I'm about to say, how will that affect somebody else? Right? Moving on, I'll move on. All right, here's another. A fool's words will destroy him. So look at the latter part of that passage there. But the lips of a fool. Now, I put in here the idea, which is a scriptural thought, that a fool is someone that is stupid, insolent, lacking understanding, or they can be immoral. Immoral in their words, immoral in the content of their life. So, the words of a wise man's mouth are tending to be gracious. But the lips of a foolish man will swallow him up. And I gave you the idea in your notes there of what it means to be swallowed up. It means to be engulfed. It means to be consumed. We could add to that like the picture of a fire that it tends to just absolutely destroy. So the lips of a fool will swallow him up. I'm going to keep moving, if that's all right with you, to verse 13. It continues with this same thought here. So the beginning then of the words of his mouth, the fool, is foolishness. So this is carrying over from verse 12. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is mischievous madness. Let me give you a few thoughts that go with that. I think it's on my PowerPoint here. All right, here's one. Matthew 15, verse 18. But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile the man. So whatever comes out of someone's mouth is generally going to be a honest reflection of what's in their heart. Now, somebody can lie and deceive, but generally when somebody speaks without thinking, they're speaking from the heart. And it has a lot to, it reveals a lot about who we are and our character. Here's another, Luke 6 and verse 45. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is good. And an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is evil. For of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaketh. So think about your conversation, the words that you use, how you speak to people. It is the overflow of what is in your heart. So let's go back. Look at the two verses that are on your outline. And so in verse 12, a wise man is known for gracious words, but a fool, his words will swallow him up. They will destroy him. And then looking at verse 13, the beginning of the words of a fool, of his mouth, is foolishness. Now, I put in there, it lacks understanding or discernment. And the end or the conclusion of his talk is mischief. It's bad, it's evil, it's wicked. And in fact, the Bible even describes it as what? As madness. Now, here's a question. You know that the Bible has a lot to say about our words. So here's a question for you. Why is the Bible so focused on your tongue? On your words, on your conversation. Why such a focus on that? You can help me out today and not make me do the whole lecture, you know. Anyone? Yeah.
Well, the impact of our words is tremendous. Just think about, I think one of the reasons people are unrestrained today in what they say is the media outlet. All of the methods and the ways that we have of putting forth our ideas, our words, it's just everywhere and at a fingertip. And so the impact and influence of our words is so far-reaching that we may not even realize the extent that it carries.
Right. Here's something for you. Think back, again, I'm going to take you back to junior high or high school, okay? How many of us remember criticism about us personally? About what you look like, how smart, intelligent you were you talented? Maybe it was a coach. Maybe it was a teacher in school. Maybe it was a friend. But you remember the words that they said, and they either challenged you or they discouraged you. I dare say that there are many around us, even in a church like this, that there's something someone said to them years ago, and it shadows their life. It just kind of colors their life. It might have been a remark about your family, or something else that was just very deeply personal. So the thought is this, is that words are what? They're powerful, aren't they? You know, what's the adage? Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will what? Never hurt me. And we know that's a lie. Words run deep, and they can hurt much. Moving on, all right? I decided to use this here because there are two of my least favorite people. But I think they are a good application of the truth we're about to learn. Wise men speak sparingly, but the fool is full of words and wise in his own eyes. Now, granted, there are many politicians I could put up there, but nobody was better at a word salad than Kamala, so I had to use her, full of words. Let me give you the verse here, all right? You have it on your outline. I actually put the whole thing up there for our study here. So here's what we read. A fool also is full of words. Now, when you're talking, you're not what? Not listening, all right? When you're talking, you're not listening. So let's think about it. A fool also is full of words. A man cannot tell what shall be or what shall come to pass, and what shall be after him. Who can tell him? Now think about the last phrase. Who can tell him? And so the question is, what can you teach a fool? And the answer is what? Absolutely nothing. Maybe you've worked with a fool. Maybe you grew up with a fool. But they're tending to be known for their words. They don't spare words. They're always talking. Now, look again at verse 14. A fool, then, is full of words. A man can tell what shall be, or cannot tell what shall be, and what shall be after him. Who can tell him? Let me give you a thought that goes with that. A fool is either unable or unwilling to follow simple instructions. And so the next verse carries that thought. So I'm going to go on to verse 15. So who can tell him? That's the question. Now here's verse 15. The labor or the trouble or the work of the foolish wearieth every one of them, because he knoweth not what? How to go to the city. Now that's a silly kind of parable, a metaphor that is there. But remember, we're talking about a foolish man who's full of words, which means he's not listening. And then when you, verse 15, give him a simple instruction as to like how to go to town, how to get to town, they labor and they wearieth every one of them. Why? Because they are a fool. Let me give you a thought then that goes with that. A fool is incompetent. They don't accept instruction. They don't listen. They tend to weary themselves with their foolishness, and they lack the common sense. Now, I'm not going to suggest that if you don't have a sense of direction that you're a fool, but we do have GPS today on all of our phones, unless you don't have a smartphone. And it's amazing. You can plug in where your destination is, and it'll map out how to get to where you're supposed to go. Now, a fool would have the directions, but not follow them. Does that make sense? He knows someone's given him direction, but he doesn't follow the directions he's given. Now, the application isn't simply about going to the city. Application is just about life. You get directions. You're told what to do, how to do it. And a wise man listens and he heeds advice. But a foolish man doesn't. So, moving on with that. Then I wanted to get to this here, verses 16 through 20, and I think it's appropriate given our government and all of our politicians, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. But as you notice, verse 16 through 20, it's talking about government, all right? Now, in Solomon's day, it was the king and all of his advisors, those who were part of his inner circle. And so if you would consider with me then verse 16 through 20, what I'm describing is the madness of bureaucrats and bureaucracy. Now, I've been blessed to never have to work in government. Some of you haven't been so blessed. Some of you work in government system. Steve is in the school system, and there's a bureaucracy that's in there. Some of you others have worked maybe in careers where there was a bureaucracy. So let's look at the first verse, all right? All right, here's the first verse. Woe to thee, O land. So we're talking about a country or a nation. Woe to thee, O land, when thy king is a child. Now that can mean he's young or immature or inexperienced. And thy princes, now those would be officials, not the sons of the king, but those who are leaders around the king. Woe to thee, O land, a country, nation, when thy king is a child, he's young, he's immature, he's inexperienced. And thy princes, those who are representatives of the king, eat in the morning. Now, here's the thought that I'm going to suggest to you, and it is this. Indulgence. Now, indulgence. The idea of eating in the morning is to feed or consume. It's almost like the idea of indulging yourself, of gorging yourself. So it's not just a matter of getting up, having a piece of toast and an egg. This is about somebody that lives for sustenance, for they take pleasure in not eating to survive, but surviving for the opportunity of eating. So here's the thought then. The first, the leaders of a country set the standard for the people. Now, if you'll notice in verse 16, the woe would be to the citizens of the country. Woe to thee, O land. Now, so we could add to that, woe to thee, O America. Or woe to thee, the state of Florida. Or woe to thee, the Tampa Bay. Woe to thee, O land, when thy king is a child. Now, the idea of being a child there would be someone, not necessarily a child, even though there were some child kings, but child kings always had advisors around them. But the thought of the child is someone who is inexperienced, or they lack skills. They simply are inadequate for the job. Now, woe to thee, O land, when your king is inadequate. He's inexperienced. He's foolish. And thy princes, who are the leaders and the support of the king, they eat in the morning. Now, but the land itself is said, woe, you're in trouble. You're going to have a major crisis. Why are you going to have a major crisis? Because kings set the standard morally, ethically, for a country, for a people. So, woe to thee, O land, when thy king is foolish, like a child. And the princes eat in the morning. Now, the idea of eating in the morning is they are skimming off the top. They are corrupt, would be another idea that goes with that. And so, woe to the nation. Why woe to the nation? Because they're setting the standard. I sometimes look at I'm going to give an illustration of churches when they call pastors. And sometimes they call lesser men to fill the pulpit. And you wonder, why would they choose somebody that maybe has somewhat of a scandalous cloud over him? Why would they call that kind of person to be the pastor? Do you know why? Well, kind of keep control, but the fact that if you lower the standard of the leader, then it makes everybody else more comfortable where they are. The leader ought to be setting the standard of where the people ought to be. We as a nation, and again, we don't have perfect leaders in either party, but we as a nation have had a tendency, really, I think, for arguably maybe I'm going to go all the way back to Eisenhower, all right? General Eisenhower. Since General Eisenhower, I would suggest to you that we have put in the principal offices of our nation men who are lesser men. Now, you can disagree with that, but I look at where America is today, and I see that the leadership that we have chosen have set the standard of what we have become. Let's take Donald Trump as a for instance. Donald Trump would not have been elected in the 1950s. He would have had the cloud of his immorality, his infidelity, his adultery hanging over him. He would have. There's just no way around it. You go back to Joe Biden in 1986. Joe Biden had to drop out of the presidential race because of one scandal. Do you remember what it was? Plagiarism. It was enough in 1986 for you to be guilty of plagiarism, and you had to drop out of the presidential race. Barack Obama and the cloud that hung over him, the kinship with Islam, and there is a kinship with Islam, that kind of individual would have never been elected into the high office of the land. Nor before 1956 or 1960 would a John Fitzgerald Kennedy have been elected to office. Do you know why? He was the first Roman Catholic. And the assumption of the people and the church was that his first loyalty would be to the Roman Catholic Church and to the Pope. Now, that might be foreign to you, but that is the reality in the 1960s. It's 1962, right? Is that right? He was elected? Okay. So we could go on back and back, but it's interesting. As the standard of the leadership of our nation has dropped, so has the moral fiber of our nation dropped. Comments, or you don't dare? I'm going to move on. Let me give you another here. The latter part of that verse, and thy princes eat in the morning. What it's talking about here then is leaders, the cabinet, if you would, of the king. And they have no self-discipline. They are indulgent. They are even lawless. I wrote in my notes I'm going to take you to the next thought. So, self-indulgent leadership, that's what we're looking at, right? Now, here's something I want you to think about, and I'll move on. But the ideology that has been driving American politics, really for maybe the last 20 years, is this whole woke and diversity, equity, and inclusion political ideologies. Actually, they're based in socialism and communism. But what DEI and woke have done is they have displaced the standard of moral character and merit for other standards. And so we have promoted people who do not qualify either from their training or from their character. The idea that character should be the expectation of the citizens died during one president's run for office. Do you remember who he was? Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, when the scandals of his immorality started coming out in leading up to the 1992 office, made the statement that character doesn't matter. What matters is skill. He had been the governor of Arkansas. Thought that would be a flower in his cap, in my opinion. But that was a statement. So it was a defining moment in 1992. The character doesn't matter. Bred out of that has come this whole political movement that has followed that since that time. I'm going to move on because I'm going to run out of time. All right, Ecclesiastes 10, verse 18. By much slothfulness, and I have on here what slothfulness means. It means to be extremely lazy, indolence, idleness. By much slothfulness, the building decayeth. So think about a house, think about a barn. By much slothfulness, laziness, idleness, the building decayeth. And through idleness of the hands, negligence, slackness of the hands, the house droppeth through. All right. Most of us own homes. We know that you need to have a good shingles on your roof, right? And if you don't, and water starts dripping through, eventually you're going to end up having to replace not just the roof itself, but you're going to have to replace the plywood, then you're going to have to replace the beams, and just you have a lot to do because of negligence. But in the passage here, we're talking about a country. All right, so all of this is about leadership. So this building or this house really is speaking of a government, a nation itself, the supports of a nation. And so let's read again then. By much slothfulness then, following upon the character of a king who is immature and inexperienced and he lacks skill, to his princes who are self-indulgent, by much slothfulness then, the building decayeth. The building being that which is the government itself or the nation itself. And through idleness or negligence or slackness of the hands, lowering of the hands, the house droppeth through. And so what's the illustration? Neglect governing properly, and it'll eventually bring a nation to ruin. That's the point that Solomon's making. He's a king. He's got a vested interest in what he is teaching. I wrote in my notes, a lazy, slothful person tends to neglect important things, the spiritual pillars of his family, and eventually the home will collapse. Now, I'm going to give a quick illustration. And, I didn't even give you the fill in the blank. Let me give you that. And so the thought here in verse 18 is indolence, that is laziness, and negligence brings a nation to destruction. So a president goes into office or a governor goes into office. What their platform is, what their priorities are, is going to end up being reflected through the government, all the way through. You can look at the last 50 years in America, and there's often been a lot of slackness, a lot of lacking of discipline, and particularly the last 4 years under the Biden administration was a horrific time for our nation. Our nation was declining morally. We were weak on the national, international stage of the world because there was a neglect of things that were really important at home. Let me give you a quick illustration. And I wrote this. It came to my mind. Do you know who this is? Anybody? Or do you know who is in the background? Sugar Ray Leonard. Who said that? You said, yeah. So who's in the front, the foreground? Roberto Duran. Very good. Let me read to you. I wrote it out to make my time easy here. Panamanian boxer Roberto Duran competed from 1968 to 2001 and held world championships in 4 weight classes: lightweight, welterweight, light middleweight, and middleweight. He is only the second boxer to compete over a span of 5 decades, which is amazing, and is considered one of the greatest boxers of all time. Roberto Duran, the World Boxing Championship welterweight title, won the World Boxing Championship welterweight title on June 20th, 1980 by defeating Sugar Ray Leonard in a 15-round match known as the Brawl in Montreal. However, Duran's rematch with Sugar Ray Leonard came to define his career. Anybody know what he did that defined his whole career? No moss, no moss. That is exactly right. Let me finish this illustration. Duran's rematch with Sugar Ray Leonard came to define his career. It was in November 1980, only about, 5 months after he won the championship, that he had a rematch in New Orleans. Duran showed up for the fight, overweight and unprepared. By the 8th round, he was losing on all referee cards. At the end of the 8th round, he turned his back on Sugar Ray Leonard and he said to the referee, "No moss, no moss." What does that mean? No more, or I quit. He had only 5 months earlier won a championship in 15 rounds. But after that, he wasn't training. He wasn't preparing. And so when he went into the ring, only 5 months later, he carried the humiliation of a fighter who quit in the middle of a match and gave his belt to Sugar Ray Leonard. Now, he ended up fighting all the way to 2001 after that. My point here is this. A wise leader prepares. He prepares. Let me give you, I have two more, I think, on your outline. Next one, quickly. Ecclesiastes 10, verse 19. A feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things. Now again, this is all about politics and leadership that he is talking about. And so we've gone from the indolence, the laziness, to indifference here. So what is the indifference? While the nation itself is falling in, it's in ruins. The pillars are falling. The roof is neglected. While that is happening, verse 19, the foolish king and his cabinet, his advisors around him, while all that's happening, we come to verse 19 and we read, a feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth. Let me see if I can give you a thought that goes on that. So we're looking at indifference. What is the philosophy of a fool? What was the philosophy of the rich fool in the Gospel of Luke? He said, I'm going to tear down my barns, I'm going to build greater barns, and then I'm going to say to myself, what? Eat, drink, and be merry. That is the philosophy of a fool. Look at Ecclesiastes 10:19. A feast is made for laughter. But the verse before said the pillars of the nation are falling in. They're collapsing. And yet what do we find the fools doing? Making laughter. The thought is to eat, drink, and be merry. And then it goes on to say, but money answereth all things. So here, think about it. So what Solomon is illustrating is while the roof and the pillars of government of the nation are collapsing, the foolish leaders are feasting and making laughter and wine and making merry. And they say, money is enough. Money answereth all things. Now, we know, for instance, that, what kind of nation loses trillions of dollars and doesn't have any accountability of where it went? Billions of dollars being given to non-government organizations. And if they really would find the problem, they would find that money is kicking back to the politicians themselves. Otherwise, how do you go to Washington, D.C., with $300,000, and within 10 years, you're worth tens of millions of dollars? How does that happen? And it happens because of corruption. So what Solomon is dealing with, going all the way back up to the earlier verse, which was 17, was foolish leaders. Verse 18, who have neglected the government, the pillars of the government and the strength of the nation. In verse 19, they're making light of enjoying life, eat, drink, and be merry, and money answereth all things. They're only interested in personal gain. A true leader is interested in the well-being of the nation, not in his own personal financial well-being. Does it make sense? All right, moving on. You're very quiet today. Ecclesiastes 10, verse 20. Now we end with this. Actually, I have one more verse, so I've got it 2 minutes. Curse not the king, no, not in thy thought. Curse not the rich in thy bedchamber. For a bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. The principle here is indiscretion. Indiscretion. Sometimes you can be in the company of someone else, in this monarch, the king, with others, and you curse the king. And Solomon says, don't curse the king. Or you could curse the rich. But it says, don't curse the rich in your bedchamber. All of these are private places, places that you would feel secure to say anything. And then Solomon says, because the bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. A lie, gossip, will take wings and do what? And fly to other places. Story about a lady that had trouble gossiping. She was always gossiping. And she said, well, it doesn't really do any harm. And so, well, can you go back and gather up all the lies that you've told? And so, well, yeah, I'll go and make things right. And then the person that was confronting her took a pillow, a feather pillow, ripped the feather pillow, and of course the wind took the feathers and blew them everywhere. And then the guy said, go and get up all the feathers that are blowing. And she says, well, I can't. And he said, well, that's true of your gossip too. Once you said something you shouldn't have said, you're never going to be able to get it back, because it's going to take wings and it's going to fly. So the principle here is one of making sure that we're discreet. And then I'm going back up to verse 17. In verse 17, here's the conclusion. Blessed art thou, O land, when thy king is the son of nobles, and thy princes eat in due season, for strength and not for drunkenness. So verse 17 is a contrast, I believe, with verse 16. So in verse 16, woe to the land when thy king is a child. He's foolish. Thy princes eat in the morning. They're self-indulgent. Blessed now, verse 17, after all that is said, art thou, O land, when your king is a son of nobility, when he carries himself as a king. And thy princes eat in due season. They're not self-indulgent. They have self-discipline for strength and not for drunkenness. I wrote in my notes, and I'll close. Blessed is a nation whose leaders are not self-serving and pleasure-seeking. Well, I'm going to close with that. In all of these things here, I'm not trying to contrive the truths that we're looking at, but the reality is this. Even though Solomon is writing 3,000 years ago, the heart of man hasn't changed. We're still corrupt. We're still a wicked people. And without the checks and balance of law, you'll invariably end up with anarchy and chaos. I would submit to you that we are a divided nation right now. There's still enough salt and light in America that there might be hope of turning back to the Lord. But there's just as much darkness and lawlessness in America right now that we could easily lose our liberties and lose our freedoms. The structure of our nation has been neglected morally, educationally. We've not trained our youth to understand the Constitution and the liberties that we have from God. And instead, we have put in places of power and authority people who are foolish men and women, and they're morally corrupt. And as a result of that, we're reaping the whirlwind.